We're here today to talk about cloud costs and reporting on them, and hopefully aligning that with your what services you're delivering for your business or your customers. The agenda today, so I need to go over some things with you to make sure that everyone understands the sort of building blocks that we have, organizational options about how we set up our GCP infrastructure. Then we'll go over what's available for tooling out there. And then we can get into some strategies towards the end of the presentation about how we can apply those and help you sort of line up your costs. So I'm Jeremy, Director of Cloud Infrastructure for Augusto. Augusto's been a GCP partner for at least 10 years since G Suite was first released. Augusto sort of started the Google practice there and divested the rest of the business. And since then, we've been strictly focused on Google technologies. So my role in infrastructure is to do everything that's not app dev or G Suite or Chrome for the most part. So we help customers all day, every day with aligning their costs and identity management and implementing these various architectures. Okay, so I wanted to start out with a couple things that I observe as I work with our customers. First of all is that your consumption, everyone is in their own state, right? But consumption starts at zero, of course, and ramps up. So I'm trying to get to the point that it can surprise you sometimes, right? Organizations want predictable costs. They want to know, hey, what's my bill going to be next month, right? But cloud isn't really designed for that ultimately because you pay for what you use. It's not supposed to be a predictable model, but our companies still want predictable. So we try to sort of meet in the middle and estimate and use reporting tools. And I put the quote down on the bottom in number 2 there, get this under control. Like it's something that we hear from our customers. Maybe you get started and you kind of fly under the radar for your consumption. And then eventually you hit a dollar amount that raises some alarms within your organization. And hopefully before we get there, we can have some reporting that shows you like, why did we get there? Like just because like, it doesn't mean our costs are out of control is what the point I'm trying to say is like, sometimes customers just haven't spent any time on reflecting back to their business outside of the IT organization or whoever is responsible for primary GCP administration. Sometimes they just haven't shared the right information with the business. So that's a lot of why we're here. Point 3 is there are a lot of different people in your organization who may be interested in this data and they need different stuff. App owners, business units need different stuff than the finance department. Then maybe if you have central IT, not everybody does, but maybe if you have central IT, they need different things and executives want their view as well. Sort of high level way of looking at it. So we'll cover tool sets that'll help us for all of those different people and build out a strategy that sort of is proactive here. So let's go through some definitions. Hopefully this isn't too basic for you, but I want to make sure everybody understood. In GCP, we have orgs. So that's your Augusto.com, for example, for me. We can have any number of them, right? It's a DNS domain. They're free. Sometimes we want more than one. Sometimes we want some isolated for GCP. Sometimes we want it to be our primary domain. But we have the concept of an org node. Inside that used to be projects, and projects have resources. So resources being compute engine, VMs, Kubernetes, Cloud SQL, any of your different technologies. And in between there are folders. So folders are not super old. They haven't existed forever. And we're constantly finding new ways to do them. And folders are something that's been really helpful for us recently. So simply projects can reside in folders, but don't have to. So I put a couple of data points here. I think Google, when they designed them, would primarily tell you that folders are there for IAM enforcement point. So you can set up some permissions on a folder, and then every project you create in there will inherit those permissions, right? A lot like a folder structure you'd find on a file system. Excuse me. But we're finding other ways to use them in terms of reporting as well. Projects are completely separate from each other, but report into the same folder. Resources then are part of the project, like I mentioned. And then important point is that you don't have to have a project in a folder. So if you stand up an empty org node in GCP, I'm sure plenty of you have seen this, that, hey, I don't have a folder. I don't have to have them at all. So then outside of all of that tree that I just drew, there are billing accounts. A lot of you may know your billing account as being something in your org, but it doesn't have to be in there. And you don't have to have just one billing account. But a billing account is simply a bill. It's going to come as its own bill, and the bill is linked to projects. And so you can default things, right? But generally speaking, the bill has projects, the billing account has projects associated with it. Yeah, and you can disable billing on the individual project level as well. Important to note that billing accounts also have their own IAM permission sets. So you can blend in like some folder permissions along with billing account permissions to come up with a strategy to make sure the right people are assigning billing to the right place. Okay, switching gears a little bit, our labels. When we come into cost reporting, a lot of people jump to the concept of labels immediately. It's not our only strategy, but it's a super important one. Okay, so you can label lots of things. For the purposes of billing information, you link them with a resource. So at the simplest level, a GCE VM has a key value pair that you could assign to it that is the label, right? So we can have a bunch of them per. You can have a permission set, so 64 labels per resource. Really billing specific related here. I have a couple example use cases in a minute, but labels based on a team or cost center are a super common way to report on billing, right? Like that's kind of one of the default ways that Google might look at them being used. Here you go, laundry list of things that can be labeled, probably not complete, but think of anything that bills, that generates costs, has a SKU associated with them, can be labeled. I think it's probably important, I don't think I covered it in the next slide. I think it's probably important to tell you that projects can be labeled as well. That's a newer functionality, but that label doesn't show up in the billing data. So it's not like an inheritance thing. I've seen people kind of assume that, hey, I label my project, and I might use that for various automation reasons, but I can't look at that label for the project when I look at billing for, say, GCE. It doesn't, an instance wouldn't inherit the label. Okay, so you'll see stuff, VM instances, images, persistent disks, snapshots, BigQuery, even individual queries, Cloud SQL, all the major products have support for labels. Here's some example things that you might apply to a resource, an owner, a team, an environment, production, dev, test, whatever, an app name, server type, OS image, and so their use case isn't strictly for billing. You might apply some kind of security policy or some kind of automation to that. You might use it for scripting to find all the VMs with this certain label and do something with them. But I mean, for the purpose of this conversation, they're there to help you report. GKE is super popular. This is a little bit in the weeds, but I wanted to bring it up because I think it's important coming up here in a little bit to understand that GKE has namespaces and it can assign labels to them. But in the billing data, I can't see the labels outside of the cluster, right? So you assign the labels from the billing perspective at the cluster level only. So you'll see if you have a bunch of stuff in a rather large cluster, it'll look like a jumbled together mix. Multi-tenant people in particular will need to come up with a strategy for how to deal with this. Okay, so that kind of sets the stage of the different building blocks we have within GCP. So now I wanted to go over the what kind of data can we get at, right? So at the billing account level, we can export into BigQuery, right? And I'd assume everyone's familiar with BigQuery. It's a platform-based database that's ready to use. We can go into our billing account settings and set up to export billing data to whatever data set we choose. Okay, so if we were to have more than one billing account, we would end up with separate data sets. They wouldn't be mixed together. At a minimum, they'd be in separate tables. So I wanted to give you a little bit about what's in there, because it becomes really important to understand that. BigQuery billing data is so let me back up. Your billing account then, at the end of every month, you'll receive a CSV file. And the CSV file will have, for every project, it'll have every single SKU that you're using and the number of units and the bill and the dollar amount associated with that. Okay, so that's at this really kind of high-level, glossy view. The BigQuery data is not that. The BigQuery data trickles in throughout the month, throughout the day. You'll have, I don't know, thousands of rows that show up in there throughout the month as you're reporting. So I'll kind of go over a few of the different items that are in there. So there'll be a usage start and end time for every single row. It'll associate with an invoice month. So the invoice months in BigQuery do add up. If you do sums on it and you look at the month, it will add up to exactly down to the penny to your bill. A project, of course, is associated with it. A service, so compute engine is a service. Cloud storage is a service. Within a service are SKUs. Okay, so persistent disk, for example, is a SKU that falls within compute engine. So there's, I included a link to the SKUs, but it's like a crazy number of SKUs. Now we talked about folders. Folder data shows up in BigQuery in the ancestry numbers is what the column's called. That will be in the form of an organization, and then separated by slash will be your full folder path. So you could have up to 5 things in there, right, with 4 folders and inside an org. Important to note, those are numbers. If you look inside the GCP console and you explore your resources, you'll see numbers. It's an identifier number, and you'll need to look that up if you're doing any reporting on it. So that data's in there. Labels, key value pairs, or nested data that's in there. Location, as in zone, region, country, whatever the resource is, whatever the appropriate thing is there. Like cloud storage might show up as a country versus a VM would show up in a region and a zone. And then usage, costs, and credits. So it'll have a unit, it'll have a dollar amount for the cost, and then credits are important to note as you're looking through whatever billing reporting data you're looking at is the credits are like sustained use discount will show up as a credit, for example. So a SKU has a list price, and it ends up multiplying by the second throughout the month, and then halfway through the month, you start to receive a discount. That discount shows up as the form of a credit. So you have to add them together to get your total cost for that particular row. Okay, so this conversation is important to bring up. The main tool you have to look at this data is right in your console. Console billing reports. No setup required. You just log in and can see your billing reports. I'm sure all of you have. You can view this data by a number of different things, right? So you can filter by date, range, project, product, SKU, labels, all the above. One thing that's not in there are folders. I don't know if that's coming or not, but it's not in there today. So it's a really detailed way to look at something. You could use this reporting to say, how much paid OS licenses do I have for last month, right, in this project, for example. That's in there by looking at the SKU data. And you also can group that data together. So you could look at, like, hey, how much did that project cost? Pretty much you can explore your data in any number of ways that you want to. It's a super powerful tool and really good for GCP administrators to use. Our experience has been that as we get away from people who use GCP on a daily basis, the less they really would want to go in there and navigate into that. And that's where we use separate reporting for those kind of personas. So your GCP admins are going to be totally fine figuring out whatever they need to. One of my primary ways to look when questions come up is to just log in the billing reporting and go look at it. So that's like the base to build off of. From a product perspective, Data Studio is included with GCP. Data Studio connects to BigQuery and numerous other data sources, but for the purpose of this, it'll hook up to BigQuery, and you can use it as a visualization tool, and the only thing you pay for is whatever BigQuery costs that you have. And so, BigQuery is super cheap for when you're just looking at small data sets like billing data. You're probably looking at usage in the pennies range. So it kind of flies under the radar there, and it pretty much ends up being a free reporting tool for you to build off of. I think another important thing to say about Data Studio is you can feed it a table, and you can use the UI to design your queries, and you don't end up knowing you're making queries. Like, you don't have to sit down and write SQL here to make this happen. At the end, I have a link to a GitHub repo that'll help you with some queries. And we use a view to drive our Data Studio because we want to expose folder data by name. So I include a little helper table there. That helper table then has your folder numbers and names. And it does that link together and presents the right folder name for you. And then I include some scripts on how to gather that data, gcloud and PowerShell scripts that'll help you do that. When we're talking about visualization, there's no reason to say that it has to be Data Studio, though. If your organization has whatever other data presentation visualization tools, that's cool. Many of them hook up to BigQuery. It's very popular, so it's like most of the major players already have support for BigQuery, so you don't have to necessarily use Data Studio. But this is the one included in GCP, and it's the one we go with, and it also has Google Auth built right into it, so we can control who can see it, and we can share it just like we're used to with our business that's driven by G Suite. Brand new, I think it might have been formally released yesterday. It was in beta form, and we've been using it for quite a while, is the Sheets data connector. So it's Google Sheets data connector for BigQuery, and we can write a query, plop it in just like you see in the screenshot there, and then we have our accounting people run their own queries, and so they can pull up a month and summarize the data however we decided in the query, and then they have immediate access to that at the end of the month. For accounting people, they seem to really love tabular data. Okay, so everything we've said here doesn't address the fact that people want, how much did that VM cost me? It's something that comes up all the time. Okay, so there's the main way I would tell you to probably do that would be to label your VM. I think it's way faster than what I'm showing here, but I wanted to tell you that the spot to see usage data per VM is set up inside each project in Compute Engine, and it'll export to CSV only. Okay, so we could pull together our own reporting if we wanted to, that'll go look at the units of the data that we see here, so it'll be a whole bunch of rows inside this sheet, one for each object, and it'll show you how many seconds did I use, how many byte seconds of RAM did I use, or how many seconds of CPU did I use, and I can use that at the end of the month to calculate how much that VM costs. No, that's not, there's no tool sets beyond that I'm aware of to help you actually figure that cost out, so it's a little bit painful to do. You'd need to look up the SKU and do the math yourself. Not the end of the world, but it's a bit of work, and that's why I'd recommend, if you do need that data, to go into a labeling strategy to try to achieve it. Or, most of our customers who are talking about that, I usually kind of turn the conversation around a little bit and try to focus less on individual instances and focus more on services. So that the concept of the VM being a permanent thing that exists forever it's not very fluid, right? And so it's much more cloud-like to look at things as a dynamic resource. The VMs come and go, and they're all part of delivering whatever service, and that's more of the level we want to look at things. Can go back? It won't go back. So important to note, sometimes people ask, though, what network traffic did I have per VM? And that's a legit need that you have, and it's in there. You can look at the inter and intra zone, and you can also look at inbound load balancers as well. Super cool. I haven't had much chance to play with this here. I wanted to bring it up. Probably a bit of a hike, but there's a session immediately after this one in Moscone on this specific feature that was just released. Okay, so GKE can dump to BigQuery usage data. So in the same data set, we could take a GKE cluster, and then we could look at namespaces, and we mentioned namespaces earlier there. We can look at namespaces or labels inside the GKE cluster, and we can join that with the billing data. So it's just performance data, but we join that with the billing data, and you can see here Google provided an example Data Studio report, and they do have a bunch of example Data Studio stuff to go look at out there if you do some searches. And maybe on GitHub I can include some links. I haven't done that yet, but I could probably do that to direct you right to the reports so you don't have to hunt around for them. But this seems like it's going to be a really cool way to build up some additional reporting that we didn't have. This was first announced, I think, late January in a blog post. Okay, so moving on to some strategies. I feel like at this point we've kind of laid the groundwork. You understand the building blocks that we have on how to organize GCP and then where we can get to our data. So it's like, what do we do with that now? How do we set it up, right? With customers, every time they come to us, want to know how many orgs should I have? How many projects should I have? Should I do everything in one big GKE cluster? All those sort of questions. And I'm not going to tell you that we have the answers because it's super situational. Customers want best practices, and I think we're at the point where we could say we have some best practices, but it's not going to be a recipe for you that tells you exactly what you need. It's more of some general guidance, and everybody's just so unique, and the platform's so vast that there's no way to tell you exactly how you should do that. So I want to come back to this, right? So consumption builds over time, so let's proactively build some reports for our people so that they don't become surprised by the bill, right? So that we don't have people who think our costs aren't under control, right? I mean, the only people I think of that I describe as not under control are people who have lost resources out there. And that's a real thing, right? VM sprawl is what we used to call it back in the day in the VMware world, where we've stranded maybe disk files, for example, right? Persistent disks. I ran into a customer the other day, 12 grand a month worth of SSDs, sitting there detached. That stuff happens. Those are the people that I think are under control. Besides that, it's usually a visibility issue about we don't really know what's going on out there because you haven't really showed me much data, and I get a bill at the end of the month and it's X number of dollars and it's not where I want it to be, and I'm kind of frustrated that I have to pay that. So it's important that our different personas there on the right have their view of the world and can kind of explore that data, and I think it helps build a lot of trust. All right, so we've presented two main ways to summarize that data, labels and folders. So I laid out a couple of points related to each. The labels are super flexible. They're built into all the existing reporting tools. They're very natural to use. The main concern we have with people who go in with an only labeling strategy is that you have to be detailed enough to get the labels there. I mean, it's that easy, and if you're doing manual processes, it gets missed. So from a process perspective, we always say we need to automate that, right? We need to provision with Terraform. We need to use any kind of automation tool, or people forget things, especially little tiny details like that. Folders are a way to automatically summarize the data, right? As long as projects get put in the right place, they're going to be reported on correctly. But the concerns sometimes where they don't work out is IAM rules are not in line. So there's several reasons why you might say that costs need to be spread out differently because I can't have that set of IAM rules on a folder. Like it doesn't add up in the end. So that's where that doesn't work. And I'll also tell you, folders aren't super flexible, right? They're a high-level roll-up. So I think the next one goes into, I call this enterprise. Call it corporate, call it non-SaaS offerings, right? So I gave an example here. You can see IT has a folder, finance has a folder, HR has a folder, sales has a folder. There are apps as in projects in those folders, and it's a very quick way to say, all right, so someone running systems for finance only has project creator access at the finance folder level, and we have a lot of customers who are doing this. And then we know exactly that finance department is going to end up paying the bill for that consumption, It will, allows for 3 layers of folders. I covered that earlier. Is it, Corey, do you remember? Is it 3 or 4? I thought it was 4.
So you could do 3 more
Yeah.
in each of those.
Yeah, thanks. That was a typo then. That's what I thought. So yeah, you can do some roll-ups if you need to. If you need to break out like finance into individual apps or dev test prod or whatever other folders beneath that for operational reasons, you certainly can. And we typically almost always roll up the costs into that top level folder. And that's what you'll find all of my scripts that are out there for all the queries that are out there roll up to the top level, but it's easy enough to adjust too. So that's kind of a typical corporate environment that's like general purpose GCP, not real focused on deploying a specific product. Some sample view here or screenshot of Data Studio. So we've got a number of folders there in that drop down. So that's a filter. This is kind of our standard report. It'll look just very similar to one you can pull down from Google. Has a date range, has a list of folders. You'll see the summary dollar amounts there on the right. And then once you dial in that cost, you can see then all the different graphics will change. So that stuff's all super easy to do in Data Studio as well. You set it up as a filter control and you tell it what column you want to filter on. I think I forgot to mention one thing too. In BigQuery, BigQuery supports date partitioning, and that's a way to limit how much data we're querying. So BigQuery is charged by how much data you query. That's kind of generally how your cost is. And so in here is date partitions are filled out by the BigQuery data export, and this control will use that in Data Studio to filter it. So say you had a gig of data or whatever number of data that covered all of time, right? And if you just press search without a filter on it, it will scan all that data, and you'll pay for that whole query. But in this case, I said February 1 to February 28, and that adjusted the date partition filter, and so I only paid for maybe it's 10 meg of that data, or whatever the number is. It's the subset of data, so I don't need to pay for it all, and it does kind of keep things more affordable. Not a huge concern for most people in their footprint of their billing data because it is small enough, but still important to note that that's easy enough to do and it's built in the platform, so why not use it and save a little bit of money? So yeah, that's the kind of view. The standard report that you pull down from Google has broken down by resource, by project. You could explore into compute engine, and you could see, for example, how much you're paying for a persistent disk. There's a number of ways to break that down. And so here's then the similar kind of concept to present that in Sheets view. So the BigQuery connector in Sheets. So like I mentioned, this would be what your finance department uses to report back their spend to the business, break down those costs. So really easy tabular way to do it, and that's an example of a way to group by folder. There's no reason you couldn't group by label as well, or both. And I include sample BigQuery of what you would put in here to generate that as well. I even did one that has last month automatically calculated for you, so you don't need to apply that. And it'd be really easy to just stick it in a sheet and start using it. Okay, so a single tenant model, like these guys are the easiest to make decisions for, I think. Meaning we have a certain amount of resources that are provisioned every time we spin up a customer. Super obvious that we probably need to automatically provision that customer. So we build some Terraform scripts. We separate out with IAM, dev, test, and prod perhaps. And we deploy a new project for every customer. And we deploy whatever into that project that makes the customer go. Usually the biggest decision you're going to make there is related to networking, kind of out of scope of this conversation, but obviously it's super important. Everybody with a single tenant model always has some kind of common ops system, monitoring, security systems, those kind of things that it gets to be tough to align those costs with individual customers. They're just kind of a fixed fee that our customers have. So generally speaking, we don't associate those costs back to an individual, the ops systems. But you can see there, individual project level reporting is sufficient, generally speaking, to say how much for customer A to run last month is a very easy thing to search on. That's super obvious. We do have a lot of people who try to fit numerous customers into one project, but yet still have a single tenant system. And like our default would be to recommend not to do that unless we had a specific reason to. So there's a little bit of kind of conversation that needs to be had when they're in that spot and try to figure out why they want to do that. But generally, don't be afraid to make projects, right? We have customers out there who have hundreds of projects, and it's cool. It all fits within the reporting scheme. It doesn't cost anything additional. So it's a nice, easy divider there for you to reflect those costs back. All right, the elephant here, right? Multi-tenant systems. And how do I use the tool sets you've showed so far to reflect back cost per customer? And this is hard, right? This isn't easy at all. Oftentimes it takes a conversation about what's your architecture, right? I kind of see this and I assume we have a GKE strategy, but not everybody's there, right? There's plenty of other spots to be in for people. Almost always, I'd say let's look at a labeling strategy. The folder idea just kind of isn't going to apply here. It's not going to add a ton of value. We might do both. We might do both depending on how we're using GCP, but labels are a better way to dial in those costs. Application level monitoring is of course the best strategy, right? For the really large fish, they'll be building in ways to track how much each customer is using all the different APIs, do tracking back that way, maybe look at transaction costs, probably look at a way to monitor disk and storage usage. Maybe fairly obvious, but use a stack that is friendly for auto scaling so that the resources can expand and contract. That applies to everybody, but multi-tenant architectures need to do that, right? GKE is by far the most common choice of how they choose to do that, and then looking at monitoring within the clusters. I'm not going to get into how many GKE clusters should we have here. I know that's like super hotly debated as to how big we go with that. We know most people have a namespace strategy to try to isolate things. We know we're getting more and more comfortable with bigger clusters, but I wouldn't always assume like, let's go with one cluster and shove everything into it. That's not necessarily the plan. It takes a bit of a conversation about scale, about what are the different services involved, and almost always is a whiteboard conversation for us. So like I said, multi-tenant cost alignment is very hard. We've got a lot of tools that can help you here. New area is monitoring services within GKE to try to report back what's happening at that level. But in true multi-tenant, we're still going to have customers all mixed together, transactions all mixed together, and we need to really build it in the app to monitor what's going on there. Yeah, I can't think of, yep. I think that's about all at the high level that we can give you on the multi-tenant system. Be easy enough to build some reports off of this that help you see what's happening at the service level, for example. Common recommendations across the board that we have. Automate provisioning. Terraform is something that's comes up every day in our world. Provision things programmatically, and then we can make sure they're put in the right folders. We can make sure they have the right labels attached, and that the reports are going to be accurate. Another important recommendation is start your folder design with talking about IAM. Don't start talking about reporting. right? We're approaching it kind of backwards then. We need to make sure that we're not using folders just to report on consumption, and then we have a less than ideal identity access model. We need to start by looking at what permissions do we need to dial in per folder before we talk about is that valuable as a roll-up for costs. And a combination of labels and folders is super common. It's not like a this or that. We can use both. All right, so like I mentioned, I have some example queries out there on GitHub, super big long path. We don't have 1 million projects on our GitHub though, on our public GitHub. So if you go to github.com/Augusto, you will see a script to go dump out using gcloud commands to dump out what are my top level folders and what are their numbers. And if I feed it the right switch, I can even generate the insert syntax to dump that into a table in BigQuery. So then the other example queries that I wrote have an assumption that you're going to have that table in place. So I made the create table statement. I made several of the required things to set it up, and then you can use then you can generate some queries and kind of see for yourself what the data looks like. And at that point, hopefully it's usable to be able to as a building block for you to start creating your own reporting. Like I mentioned, I'll try to add in this afternoon then some links to the template Data Studio reports. Maybe start with the view that I created in there. You'll see one called view. I don't remember exactly the title of the file, but it's a view. And if you save it as a view, you can hook up Data Studio to that instead of the billing data table, and it will pull in your folder names for you that you can then use to filter. So hopefully that's a starting point for you to start building some of your own reporting and be able to present to your different people within your business what they need. So from there, I mean, the recommendation is always talk about who needs to see this, right? And try to identify a couple of different groups within your organization who need reporting, and then start working with them to see what kind of exact data do they need, right? So we have those standard Google Data Studio templates that we work from, and then we add things all the time, right? The first one we add is paid OS. For anybody using paid OSs, they kind of need to see that. So it's pretty easy to see how that works once you have the example. So whether you're a technical person like that and want to dive in, or whether you want to give that to someone else, I think we have a starting spot for you.